Hello and welcome to Talking Tang, a podcast series where we'll examine Tang Dynasty of classical China. My name is Joy and I'm the host of the show today. And with me to discuss all about Tang is my wonderful friend Daisy.
Hello, everyone.
Each episode will talk about one aspect of Tang Dynasty from the monarchs to the art and to the many wars. Today we'll tell you the story of three very ambitious women.
Before we talk about Princess Anle, Taiping, and Shangguan Wan'er, three women I find absolutely fascinating, I just want to add on to the last episode where we talked about Wu Zetian, the first female emperor of Tang Dynasty. So, you know how Wu Zetian got rid of Lady Xiao to be empress to Gaozong?
Mhm.
So what she did was that she actually caned her 100 times, cut off her limbs, put her and another concubine called Lady Wang into a vat of alcohol and let them die and then beheaded them. And Lady Xiao, before her death, said, and I quote, I vow in my next lives to be a cat, and Wu shall be a mouse, and life after life I shall bite her throat. And after that, hilariously, cats were no longer kept in the palace.
Wow, that's fascinating, but also very disturbing. Okay, now let's get started with the podcast. Firstly, let's talk about Shangguan Wan'er, who was called the first female prime minister of China.
Right, so Shangguan Wan'er is a writer, poet, and most widely known as a politician. And to get to know someone, we have to look at their background, and inevitably, in Tang Dynasty, Wu Zetian is definitely involved. So Shangguan Wan'er's grandfather, Shangguan Yi, was a court official who rose to prominence under Gaozong, the third emperor of Tang Dynasty. Shangguan Yi became a chancellor in year 662. Then, 2 years later, Gaozong became anxious and angry that Wu Zetian had too much power, and he consulted Shangguan Yi about this. Shangguan Yi suggested that Gaozong should get rid of Wu Zetian. Wu Zetian found out about this, and Gaozong blamed Shangguan Yi. So what happened next was that Wu orchestrated this investigation where her ally, the Chancellor Xu Jingzong, falsely accused Shangguan Yi, the crown prince at the time, Li Zhong, who was not Wu Zetian's son, and an eunuch who was also against Wu Zetian. And she accused these three people of plotting against Gaozong. So in one move, Wu Zetian got rid of three of her enemies. And so Li Zhong was forced to commit suicide while Shangguan Yi and his son, so Shangguan Wan'er's father, and the eunuch were all executed. And after that, Wu Zetian was in control.
And Shangguan Wan'er?
Well, Shangguan Wan'er and her mother were spared, but they became slaves in the palace. Fortunately for Shangguan Wan'er, though, she was very smart, and she developed a knack for writing poetry. Wu Zetian found her poetry one day, and she asked Shangguan Wan'er to write an essay on the spot. Shangguan Wan'er did well in this examination, and Wu took her in as her secretary.
Here we see a parallel between Shangguan Wan'er and Wu, don't we?
Yeah, definitely. As our listeners remember, Wu Zetian became Taizong's secretary due to her knowledge of history, and she thus rose to power that way.
So she becomes his secretary. Then what? What does she do?
Well, at first, she mainly writes out the imperial edicts, and her writing was said to be very beautiful. But on one occasion, she disobeyed Wu's order. So we see that she was very ambitious and brave, and she was supposed to be put to death. But Wu Zetian did not want to waste her talent and spared her, but she tattooed Shangguan Wan'er on the face. After that, Wu ordered that all the officials submit their petitions to Shangguan Wan'er, and Wu consulted with her on state affairs.
In 705, all this changed. In a coup, Wu Zetian was removed and Zongzong, her eldest son, was replaced onto the throne. Shangguan Wan'er became a 14th rank concubine, and her job was to draft imperial orders.
She also had an affair with Zhongzong's cousin, so Wu Zetian's nephew, Wu Sansi. Through Shangguan Wan'er, Wu Sansi became Zhongzong's trusted advisor and started his own affair with Lady Wei, Zhongzong's wife.
Those two sentences can be summed up by one phrase: the drama in the palace is very complicated.
Right, we didn't even delve into the drama between Wu Zetian and Gaozong's other wives for this reason.
Here we'll introduce another powerful woman, Li Guo'er. She is Zhongzhong's favorite daughter born to Lady Wei and is called Princess Anle. And she's married to Wu Sansi's son. She was heavily doted upon by her parents, which was most likely contributed to her drive to power. She often humiliated her brother Li Chongjun, who was the crown prince on the account that he was not born to Lady Wei. She even suggested to Zongzong that she should be named crown princess and be his heir. However, Zongzong refused this.
But she was very powerful nonetheless. In an unprecedented move, Zhongzong allowed the seven princesses of the time, which included Anle, to retain staff like imperial princes would. So Anle had the largest number of staff, and it was said that she was very corrupt, often selling government offices to people for money. And she also competed with other princesses for extravagance and spent a lot of money building palaces, temples, and pavilions.
Then, in the summer of 707, Li Congjin attempted a rebellion and killed Wu Sansi and Wu Sansi's son. He explicitly wanted to arrest Shangguan Wan'er, but Zongzong, Shangguan Wan'er, and Lady Wei were all protected. The rebellion ended with Li Congjun and his allies being killed.
Here we see a turning point in Shangguan. After this coup, especially since Li Chongjun especially wanted to arrest her, she distanced herself from Lady Wei and Princess Anle, instead aligning herself with Zhongzong's sister, Taiping.
Who is Wu Zetian's daughter.
That's right. Before we get into Taiping's story, I want to mention the investigation that ensued the coup by Li Chongjun. Princess Anle wanted to implicate Princess Taiping and Ruizong, who you might remember is Wu Zetian's second son, so Zhongzong's brother, into the plot and to have them investigated as well because they were threats to her being potentially in power. But Zhongzong stopped this due to suggestions by officials.
So let's talk about Taiping. If Anle wanted her dead, she must be a powerful influence as well.
She is. Princess Taiping is the youngest of Wu Zetian's 6 children. Wu Zetian thought that Taiping was similar to her in appearance and attitude, so she favored Princess Taiping and often discussed state affairs with her.
In year 710, Zongzong died most likely by poison given to him by Lady Wei and Anle. Lady Wei and Anle pushed Zhongzong's youngest son, Li Chongmao, who was merely a teenager back then, onto the throne. He became Emperor Shang. But some people wanted Lady Wei to become the emperor, and some wanted Taiping and Ruizong to be removed. Hearing this, Taiping acted with Ruizong's son, Li Longji, and they launched a coup killing Lady Wei, Princess Anle, and many others in the Wei clan. Shangguan Wan'er was unfortunately not spared.
Ruizong then became the emperor, and Taiping thus became his trusted advisor.
Thank you, Daisy. When we come back, we'll continue Princess Taiping's story. But first, here is the usual reminder to subscribe to our podcast, where we explore a broad range of historical events from unique perspectives. In the last episode of our sister show, Herodotus, Daisy and Sadhana talked about a secretive operation in Latin America during the Cold War. And on Twin Tours, our good friend Sue took a look at the cases of silent twins, where the twins become obsessed with each other. Taiping became a powerful influence during Ruizong's second reign. Like Wu Zetian, before she declared herself emperor and Lady Wei, she sat behind a pearl curtain during imperial meetings and gave Ruizong advice.
But one thing troubled Taiping. Li Longji, Ruizong's son, was said to be the crown prince. Taiping had supported this notion before, but she soon found that Li Longji was strong-willed and could not be easily controlled. This means that she would not have as much power over Li Longji as she could to her brother. So she tried to find faults in Li Longji, but that did not succeed.
Then in year 712, Taiping showed Ruizong the constellation Di Zuo. The constellation that symbolized the imperial throne had changed, meaning that there will be a change in emperor. This is a form of superstition, but people believed it back then. She meant to use this occasion to make Ruizong suspicious of Li Longji, that Li Longji is plotting against him. But Ruizong took it to mean that Li Longji should now be the emperor and abdicated to him. Li Longji then became Xuanzong, the seventh emperor of Tang Dynasty. However, at Taiping's suggestion, Ruizong still retained a lot of power, more power than his son Xuanzong.
Taiping remained the most powerful person in the court for a while because all the government officials were her associates. However, in 712, Xuanzong approved the plan carried out by two officials to kill some of her allies. This news was leaked, and this caused Xuanzong to abandon it, and those two government officials were exiled. In year 713, Taiping, along with other members of the Li family, tried to plot against Xuanzong. They discussed potentially poisoning him, but their plan was leaked too. So Xuanzong acted first and killed all of Taiping's most prominent associates. When Ruizong heard the news, it was said that he went in person to confirm what was happening and then transferred all power to Xuanzong.
So, do we see a sort of mental breakdown happening?
It could be speculated because he had trusted Taiping and also lived in her shadow for so long, and he was just probably reacting to all this change badly and didn't want to deal with the situation.
Yeah, just a word on Ruizong. He didn't have a very nice reign. He had always been in other people's shadows.
And I also feel like he knows he isn't as good as the people around him, such as his mother and also his sister. And he is very aware of that. But anyway, hearing what has happened to her associates, Taiping fled into the mountains and was forced to commit suicide 3 days later by Xuanzong. All her properties were confiscated, and apparently it took several years to clearly account everything she owed because she was so wealthy.
So, lesson of the day, you can't bring anything to the grave.
I know you're the host of this episode, but I want to ask you a question. What do you think about the princesses Anle and Taiping, and why do you think that they didn't succeed in obtaining power?
I think Wu Zetian was brought up quite differently compared to Anle and Taiping. As Wu Zetian had to work her way up the ranks, she knew how to maintain relationships better compared to the two princesses who were privileged. I think their mindset were also quite different. Unlike the princesses, Wu Zetian never had the security of a noble background. It was always something she had to work for. Lastly, in my opinion, Taiping was very accomplished and very smart. However, there were circumstances that prevented her from following in Wu Zetian's footsteps successfully, whereas I don't think Anle ever had the ability to.
I agree with you. Taiping was very scheming and she knew how to get power, and this actually made me really want to admire her. And I know that she was very corrupt, and I find that I like to overlook certain people's flaws because I look up to them because they're powerful. But like she certainly had her flaws, and so comparing Taiping's experiences to Zetian's, I think there were many parallels. Ruizong was like Gaozong in a sense, for they were both weak and easily manipulated, and both Wu Zetian and Taiping took advantage of that. It's just a matter that Wu Zetian was easily able to control Zhongzong and Ruizong because they were her sons, but Taiping met a harder target in Xuanzong. And as for Anle, in my opinion, she was just too arrogant. She didn't have a sure foot in crown princesship, and she still treated Li Chongjun badly when he had more power than her. So I think that was just a bad move to make.
The host of today's show, I have a question for you to ponder upon. What qualities do you think would make it easier for a female at the time to become an emperor? Thank you so much for potting with me, Daisy, and thank you so much to our listeners for tuning in to this week's episode. Be sure to check back for our next release, where we'll go back 100 years to talk about the beginning of Tang Dynasty.
Our podcast is self-produced, and this episode is edited by Boza, who took a tremendous amount of effort to making this as presentable as it can be. And to our listeners and the corporations and billionaires who spy on us, if you want to support us, we accept donations and sponsorships.
See you next week.